Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 5th of August. Happy Wednesday to you, 2015. Let's take a look at what's going on here in the Western Hemisphere. Really not much. Certainly not in the Atlantic Basin. Caribbean Sea just as quiet as it could be. And the Atlantic Basin, there's a couple of tropical waves out here. One here, if this will draw for me, and the other one over here. But as I will show you in a moment, the sinking motion really taking its toll. This is another perspective. This is the west coast of Africa right here, and we have a tropical wave, a fairly potent one at that, moving westward across the Atlantic, but it's going to encounter this fairly hostile air mass sitting out here, mainly the sinking motion, sort of like a blanket on a fire, if you will, not allowing the air to rise and spread out uniformly at all. So we really can't even start the convective process with this sinking motion going on, what we call subsidence. Another tropical wave and associated weak low pressure area here. This is the one I just mentioned, and there is more activity over Africa where there is a little bit more of the upward motion going on, and we can see that in this really nice chart as I zoom in a little more. All right, so this is North America here, the Carolinas, Florida, Central America, South America, etc. This is the west coast of Africa over here. And we can see all in this brown area that I'm outlining now in yellow, that represents that subsidence that I was talking about, the lack of upward motion in the atmosphere, or in this case, sinking motion. And the green represents the upward motion over Africa. And then out here in the Pacific where the typhoon is located, that will be heading closer and closer to Taiwan in the coming days. And there's a little bit of upward motion here in the east central Pacific near Hawaii where Tropical Storm Guillermo is located. We can also see this in a different perspective too, using the MJO index, the European models version here, showing right now basically just a little bit of an upward motion forecast towards the western Pacific. But really this shows us that there's no widespread global or even hemispheric upward motion patterns going on. For example, back in June and in July we had a huge amplification here in the western Pacific, and that set off several typhoons and hurricanes in the Pacific, and then it just kind of died out and is in what we call the null phase, again, where if we look at this globally, there are no very large-scale, widespread upward motion events taking place, just sort of random ups and downs around the globe as a whole. The climate forecast system suggesting over the next 40 days or so, yeah, believe it or not, it goes out 40 days. This is the current analysis here. There's the green upward motion over Africa, the brown coloring over the rest of the Atlantic Basin, and the green upward motion where the typhoon is located in the western Pacific. Then as we go out into time, 5 days, 10 days, 15, and so on, all the way out to day 40, really looking at this period through here, around day 10 through day 20, towards the end of the month, maybe a little bit more favorable conditions in the Atlantic Basin with increasingly favorable conditions in the eastern Pacific, which typically if the eastern Pacific is busy, the Atlantic Basin is not. So probably going to stay pretty quiet in the Atlantic for a while. In the Pacific, starting with this cluster of storms, probably going to have another system develop out of that. The waters are very warm here north of the equator, very warm along the equator associated with the El Nino, of course, but even in the North Pacific here, water temperatures exceeding where they normally should be this time of year. And that helped Guillermo get started and make its trek towards Hawaii over the last several days. But you can see it has been sheared apart here fairly substantially by strong upper-level winds. The forecast from the National Hurricane Center, actually the Central Pacific Hurricane Center in this case, still part of the National Weather Service, but they are based in Honolulu, I believe. The Central Pacific Hurricane Center showing that this will stay north of the Hawaiian Islands, bringing very little in the way of impact overall, as we thought the case would be for the last several days. There was a little bit of a chance, it looked like, that this could come right at the Big Island, but lo and behold, it's just a tad north, and that trajectory will keep any vacationers visitors already there and residents from having to deal with anything too strong. So that's good news. On the other hand, in the western Pacific, we do have Typhoon Solador, however you say it. I tried to look up pronunciation guides for it, and I just can't find it. Nevertheless, the name notwithstanding, this is a strong typhoon, not as strong as it was yesterday, headed towards Taiwan here over the next several days, and then eventually making a landfall, as we see on this particular map, in mainland China after crossing over Taiwan. Now don't forget, you can track this in Hurricane Pro and HD, as both of those apps do global tropical cyclone tracking for you. So they have some wonderful products in those apps. If you have it for your iPad, the HD version, or on your iPhone, or even an iPod, right? You can keep up with what's going on globally. This particular map generated by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and it shows the center of the typhoon going right over the center of Taiwan over the next several days. Maybe, look up here, as a Category 4 again, as we would call it on the Saffir-Simpson scale, about 120 knots or so as it approaches and moves over Taiwan. Not very good news for them. The rainfall, the storm surge, and the battering waves on the east side of Taiwan, and the rock slides, that's going to be a real problem. Now, who can you follow if you're interested in what's going on over there? I'll give you a couple of suggestions. One such gentleman is James Reynolds here with Earth Uncut TV. James Reynolds, check him out on Twitter. He is already there in Taipei, and he will be following this over the next several days, posting what he can on his Twitter feed, as will Josh Morgaman, another just really, I say brave. I don't use that term lightly. I mean, the guy goes into some of the worst weather in the world, and he does it all with handheld cameras. We like to put unmanned camera systems out ourselves, but this guy will actually film it with his handheld camera and bring you into the storm like you haven't ever seen it before. And the good thing about both these fellas is they respect the science, they respect the people that are being impacted, and they bring us the news, just like, you know, a modern-day war photographer would. And that was really prevalent back in the different world wars, for example, the Vietnam War, of course. And there was a lot of respect for war photographers. Well, these guys document man versus nature. And I think that's a lot more appealing than man versus man, don't you? And so they do a really good job. So I suggest you follow James Reynolds and Josh Morgaman. Both of them going to be on site. They're already there. This is a radar shot, by the way, of Cabo San Lucas on Josh's Twitter landing page, as Hurricane Odile made landfall there last September. So check those gentlemen out as they follow the typhoon into Taiwan, and you'll learn something from them. They're great. I highly recommend it. All right, well, that's it from me for today, and probably for the rest of the week. Maybe on Friday as the typhoon rolls in, we can check in on James and Josh's pages on Twitter and see what they have encountered as that typhoon makes landfall in Taiwan. Elsewhere around the tropics, nothing to talk about, so we might as well talk about that. Have a good rest of your Wednesday. Again, I'm Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com and, of course, Hurricane Pro in HD, and we'll talk again on Friday.